Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Joel Hellman, Dean of the School of Foreign Service.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Welcome to Georgetown, welcome to the School of Foreign Service, and welcome to our historic Gaston Hall. We're honored to be hosting with the Center for a New American Security, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, to launch the Biden administration's first national security strategy. And we're very, very honored to have such a distinguished array of guests from the cabinet, foreign ambassadors from all over the world, foreign policy experts, and most importantly, our Georgetown students who've committed to global service and represent our very best hope to bring new ideas to secure a peaceful and prosperous future. For our guests who are just visiting Georgetown, the School of Foreign Service is the oldest school of international affairs in the United States. It was founded in 1919, 5 years before the creation of the U.S. Foreign Service. It was created in the aftermath of the unprecedented destruction of World War I and a devastating pandemic, the Spanish flu, that shook America out of a century of isolation and laid the groundwork for a fundamental transformation of the global order. Our founder summed up the core mission of the school, and he said, quote, "Unprepared as we were for war, we are resolved never to be unprepared for the peace." And for a century, this school has prepared generations of leaders not only to analyze the world, but to serve the world. Well, more than a century since that founding, we find ourselves in another era of great uncertainty around the world, shook by another global pandemic, as we shift from the great promise unleashed by the Cold War to the harsh realities of growing authoritarianism, unprovoked conflicts against sovereign nations, and economic shockwaves in a deeply interdependent global economy. At the same time, we are inspired by the newfound solidarity among democratic nations, a fierce commitment of peoples to defend their fundamental rights, and the courageous struggles of women to fight against intolerance and injustice. At this moment, we are called upon, as echoed in the words of Secretary Madeleine Albright, our beloved SFS professor and committed public service, whose legacy we celebrated in this very room just 2 weeks ago, to stand, as she said, on the side of freedom. It is against this historic backdrop and this consequential global moment that we come together to hear the Biden administration's vision of America's role in this changing global order and its enduring commitment to stand on the side of freedom. And we could have no better guide to this vision than Jake Sullivan, who's brought a deep intellect and passion for public service to his remarkable career at the White House, at the State Department, and in the classroom. So following his remarks, Jake will be joined on stage for a conversation with Meghan Sullivan, a Georgetown graduate who has exemplified our commitment to global service and now serves as the Jeane Kirkpatrick Professor of International Affairs at Harvard University. I know it will be an important and engaging conversation, including answering some questions from the future leaders in this audience. So with that, let me welcome Jake Sullivan to the podium.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. All right. Thank you, Dean Hellman, and thanks to Paul Shari and the teams here at Georgetown and at the Center for a New American Security for bringing us all together today. And Meghan, thank you for hosting our conversation, although maybe I should wait till after the grilling to say thank you. We have here before us today some of the sharpest foreign policy strategists in the country, many of whom I'm privileged to call friends. We also have the next generation of national security leaders, the students. And in some ways, my speech today is a job interview because I and my colleagues are likely going to be working for you all one of these days. I also want to take a moment to recognize a team without whom we would not be here today, starting with the Senior Director for Strategic Planning at the NSC, Tom Wright, our former senior director, who's now at DOD, Sasha Baker, and Rebecca Lissner, who's joined the office of the vice president. The three of them were instrumental in putting together this national security strategy, and I think we should give them all a round of applause. And I'd like to thank the leadership team at the NSC, John Feiner, Liz Sherwood-Randall, Ann Neuberger, Jake Phillips, and Mike Pyle, a team that has seen us through an incredibly turbulent and challenging time, but also a time where we've been able to seize meaningful strategic opportunities, some of which I will talk about in my remarks today. And then I would just like to say I'm grateful to this community in this room, representing both the future and the present of our national security enterprise. It really is incredible to have the counsel and the guidance and the support of so many people in helping shape the substance of the document that we are releasing today. 75 years ago, in the summer of 1947, President Truman was flying home to Independence, Missouri on a C-54 transport plane called the Sacred Cow. I sort of wish that's what they still called Air Force One, but he's sitting on the Sacred Cow, and nations of Europe were rebuilding from the rubble of the war. The Iron Curtain was falling. People everywhere were reckoning with the horrors of the Holocaust. It was what President Biden would call an inflection point. The post-war world and America's role in leading it was only beginning to take shape. And to make sure that it would take shape in a way that represented America's values and interests, on that very plane ride, President Truman signed a law that required his administration to create a national security strategy, a blueprint for a new world that the United States would build with nations around the globe. In just a few years, guided by that first national security strategy, Truman would create the Marshall Plan and NATO, help Europe usher in a new era of integration, and set the terms for America's engagement with the international community. Today, our world is once again at an inflection point. We're in the early years of a decisive decade. The terms of our competition with the People's Republic of China will be set. The window of opportunity to deal with shared challenges like climate change will narrow drastically, even as the intensity of those challenges grows. So we need to grasp our moment, just as Truman did his. And today, the Biden administration is releasing our national security strategy. It touches on our plans and partners in every region of the world. It details the president's vision of a free, open, prosperous, and secure international order. And it offers a roadmap for seizing this decisive decade to advance America's vital interests, position America and our allies to outpace our competitors, and build broad, effective coalitions to tackle shared challenges. I'd encourage all of you to read it in full, and I hope there will be a thoughtful and robust discussion of it in the months ahead, where you agree and where you don't. Because the matters laid out in this document and the execution of it do not only belong to the U.S. government, they belong to everyone who shares this vision worldwide. And the stakes could not be higher. The actions we take now will shape whether this decisive decade is an age of conflict and discord or the beginning of a more prosperous and stable future. Simply put, we face two main strategic challenges. The first is geopolitical competition. The post-Cold War era is over, and the competition is underway between the major powers to shape what comes next. The United States, we believe, is better positioned than any other nation in the world to seize this moment, to help set the rules, shore up the norms, and advance the values that will define the world we want to live in. But we are not on this field alone. The PRC's assertiveness at home and abroad is advancing an illiberal vision across economic, political, security, and technological realms in competition with the West. It is the only competitor with both the intent to reshape the international order and the growing capacity to do it. Meanwhile, Russia's war against Ukraine builds on years of growing regional aggression. Vladimir Putin is making reckless nuclear threats, willfully violating the UN Charter, relentlessly targeting civilians, acting with a brutality that threatens to drag us all back into the dark days of Soviet expansionism. The second strategic challenge we face is the sheer scale and speed of transnational challenges that do not respect borders or adhere to ideologies. Climate change, which is already destroying lives and livelihoods in every part of the world. Food insecurity, the energy transition, and now, as we know all too well, diseases and pandemics like COVID-19. Our strategy proceeds from the premise that the two strategic challenges, geopolitical competition and shared transnational threats, are intertwined. We cannot build broad coalitions we need to outcompete our rivals if we sideline the issues that most directly impact the lives of billions of people. Now, over the last 30 years, at various points, American strategists declared geopolitics dead. At other points, like in the last administration, cooperation on climate and other shared challenges fell by the wayside. In this administration, the Biden administration, we believe we've come to a point where we can and simply have to tackle both on an equal plane, geopolitical competition and shared transnational challenges. So we are building a strategy fit for purpose for both competition we cannot ignore and global cooperation without which we cannot succeed. Now, the good and the bad news is that the timelines for these two challenges align. This is a decisive decade for shaping the terms of competition, especially with the PRC. This is also a decisive decade for getting ahead of the great global challenges from climate to disease to emerging technology. The further good news is that despite the obvious tensions between competing vigorously while also rallying cooperation, the basic strategic moves that we have to make to prevail on both of these major challenges are the same. One, invest ambitiously and rapidly in the sources of our national strength. Two, mobilize the broadest coalition of nations to enhance our collective influence. And three, shape the rules of the road of the 21st century economy, from technology to cyber to investment and trade. This is how we will shape geopolitical competition to our advantage, and it is how we will shape effective cooperation on those transnational challenges I've described. Now, our approach encompasses all elements of our national power: diplomacy, development cooperation, industrial strategy, economic statecraft, intelligence, and defense. So let me take a moment to walk through each of these three main elements of the strategy. First, we are replenishing the reservoirs of our national power through targeted, far-reaching investments. A hallmark of the Biden approach is the integration of foreign policy and domestic policy, and a focus on the issues that spill out of those two silos: supply chains, foundational technologies, the energy transition, even tax policy. We're pursuing, in this administration, a modern industrial and innovation strategy to invest in our economic strength and technological edge at home, which is the deepest source of our power in the world. Over this summer alone, President Biden signed the CHIPS and Science Act, an executive order on advancing biotechnology and biomanufacturing innovation, and the Inflation Reduction Act, the single largest investment in climate and clean energy solutions in history. Alongside these investments, we're intensely focused on modernizing our military, the strongest fighting force the world has ever known, and the foundation of our deterrence in a turbulent world. And we're intensely focused on refurbishing our intelligence community as well, giving it the tools it needs to succeed in a fast-changing world. We must equip both our military enterprise and our intelligence enterprise for this era of strategic competition, while maintaining the capability to disrupt the terrorist threat to the American homeland. The war in Ukraine, as many of you have come to learn, also highlights the need for a vibrant defense industrial base, one that is capable of rapid mobilization and tooled for innovation and creative adaptation. All of these steps we take at home are force multiplied by another core source of American power: our alliances. After a period of significant distance and disjuncture with our allies, we are now more fully in lockstep with them than at any point in recent history. If there's anything that is a core hallmark of Joe Biden's approach to the world, it is an investment in America's allies. A few years ago, NATO was working overtime to justify its value proposition. Today, it is at the apex of its purpose and power. A few years ago, the G7 was struggling for any consensus on how to operate. Today, it is operating as the steering committee of the free world, whether on sanctions or energy security or delivering global public goods. That is through the hard work of the United States and fellow like-minded democracies, and it is paying dividends in so many of the major crises that we see around the world. In the Indo-Pacific, we've reaffirmed our ironclad commitments to our treaty allies, lifted our alliances with Japan, South Korea, and Australia to new levels of vitality, restored the visiting forces agreement with the Philippines. We've elevated a new partnership of democracies, the Quad, to help drive our vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific. We built a new transatlantic architecture for trade and technology cooperation with the European Union. One of the things that we're doing as we strengthen our alliances is to try to drive more strategic alliance between the Atlantic and the Pacific. We've launched an innovative and far-reaching security arrangement called AUKUS with Australia and the United Kingdom. We included, for the first time ever, the leaders of Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, and Australia at the NATO summit in Madrid this past June. And we're working very closely with the European Union as each of us have formulated and are now implementing our Indo-Pacific strategies. At a time when we need democracies and market economies around the world to work together, the United States has a key role to play in helping build out these collaborations. Japan and South Korea's work with us to reroute surplus natural gas to Europe, Australia's contribution of weapons to Ukraine, are examples of how connecting the Atlantic and the Pacific is playing out in practice. Now, the world's major autocracies believe that the democratic world is in decline. They seek to advance a very different vision, where might makes right and technological and economic coercion squeezes anyone who steps out of line. The last year alone has demonstrated the extreme shortcomings, indeed the fundamental fragility of this subversive vision. And the Biden administration has proven that a broad and powerful range of nations supports our vision for a free, open, prosperous, and secure world. Even if our democratic allies and partners don't agree on everything, they are aligned with us. And so are many countries that do not embrace democratic institutions, but nevertheless depend upon and help sustain a rules-based international system. They don't want to see it vanish, and they know that we are the world's best bet to defend it. That's why the second strategic focus of President Biden's approach is mobilizing the broadest possible coalition of nations to leverage our collective influence. Our goal is not to force our partners to fall in line with us on every issue. And we're not seeking to carve the world into rigid blocks. As the President said in the UN General Assembly last month, the United Nations Charter was not only signed by democracies of the world, it was negotiated among citizens of dozens of nations with vastly different histories and ideologies, united in their commitment to work for peace. So we will work with any nation prepared to stand up for the values of the UN Charter. That includes the principle of sovereignty and territorial integrity. Last March, 141 nations voted to condemn Putin's war in the General Assembly. Only 4 nations stood up for Russia: Belarus, Eritrea, North Korea, and Syria. I know which side of that I would want to be on and what side the United States is on. This week, in fact, today, perhaps while this session is ongoing, the nations of the world will vote again, overwhelmingly, to send another strong, unmistakable message to Moscow that we reject its illegitimate and illegal acts of annexation as fundamentally inconsistent with the UN Charter. The UN Charter also includes the principle of freedom of navigation and overflight. So we've stood up the Indo-Pacific Partnership for Maritime Domain Awareness. We're really excellent at naming things in government, by the way, which brings the Quad together with the nations of the Pacific Islands, Southeast Asia, and the Indian Ocean to address illegal fishing practices and build capacity to respond to disasters. It's the world's democracies working with a diverse range of governments on shared challenges that promote a common vision consistent with the terms of the UN Charter. And we're trying these flexible, creative arrangements all over the world in creative, purposeful, and entrepreneurial ways. Like I2, U2, which sounds a bit ridiculous by name, but is actually a fascinating new partnership among India, Israel, the United States, and the United Arab Emirates to work together in areas like water, space, health, and food security. To bring in the countries of the Atlantic Basin, from Africa, from Europe, North America, and South America together to cooperate on priorities like maritime security and the blue economy. By the end of this year, in 2022 alone, the President will have hosted the leaders of the Americas, the leaders of the Pacific Islands, the leaders of ASEAN, and the leaders of Africa in separate summits with a focus on practical problem solving from climate to food to energy to health. The pace, scope, and sheer dynamism of that engagement doesn't give us a lot of time to rest, but it's delivering. And it is particularly deep and growing in the critical realms where competition will play out most acutely in the decades to come. Foundational technologies, cyberspace, trade and economics, investment. That is why the third critical step in our strategy is to shape the rules of the road in these decisive domains in this decisive decade. A few weeks ago, I laid out the fundamentals of our work to preserve American and allied technological and scientific leadership for generations to come. It tracks closely with what we've just released in the National Security Strategy, including recharging the engine of American dynamism at home and deepening our partnerships abroad. This includes making sure we're doing this in a secure and effective way, securing our critical infrastructure, advancing foundational cybersecurity for critical actors from pipelines to water, and working with the private sector to improve security defenses in the technology products that you all are using every day here at Georgetown. We're investing in the technologies and industries of the future to ensure that these investments will withstand the global stress test. And our investments are only as good as the steps we take to protect them, which is why cybersecurity remains so central to the approach we are taking at the National Security Council and across our government. We're enhancing our investment screening by providing the first formal presidential guidance to CFIUS in the history of that committee. And we're making progress in addressing outbound investments in sensitive technologies, especially technologies and investments that would not be captured by export controls and that could accelerate the capabilities of our competitors in the most sensitive areas. For example, last week we launched significant, carefully tailored restrictions on semiconductor technology exports to the PRC, focused on advanced semiconductor manufacturing tools, the most advanced chips, and supercomputing capabilities. These restrictions are premised on straightforward national security concerns. These technologies are used to develop and field advanced military systems, including weapons of mass destruction, hypersonic missiles, autonomous systems, and mass surveillance. Many of you have heard the term small yard, high fence when it comes to protecting critical technologies. The concept has been cited at think tanks and universities and conferences for years. We are now implementing it. Choke points for foundational technologies have to be inside that yard, and the fence has to be high because our strategic competitors should not be able to exploit American and allied technologies to undermine American and allied security. Alongside these efforts in the technology realm, we're charting new arrangements to shape the economic rules of the road while protecting the interests of American workers. The bottom line is that we can't just go back to the traditional FTAs of the past. We have to adapt. We have to cope with fragile supply chains, widening inequality, the PRC's emergence as both our most consequential competitor and our largest trading partner. So we're bringing American workers and international partners to the table to create a more fair and more agile set of economic relationships. In June in Tokyo, President Biden launched the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which now includes 14 economies, accounting for more than a third of global GDP. The Americas Partnership for Economic Prosperity follows a similar model. It's designed to promote integration by charting new rules to govern trade in digital goods and services and to protect proprietary technologies. to establish early warning systems to identify bottlenecks in supply chains before they occur, to set new standards for clean energy. And President Biden's Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, adopted at the G7 this summer, will leverage the collective resources of the world's democracies to mobilize hundreds of billions of dollars for high-standard, sustainable investments in the Global South. Each of these partnerships will be critical to hastening the clean energy transition, which has profound geostrategic consequences as the world weans itself off fossil fuels. Now, I know that national security strategies often get criticized for not setting priorities. And frankly, as the United States, we can't be overly rigid about this, because there's a lot happening in the world and we've got to be dealing with all of it. We have to keep our eye on more than one ball at one time. The DPRK has not halted its forward progress. Iran is still advancing its nuclear program, plotting to harm Americans. Terrorist threats are more geographically diffuse than ever before. The world is anything but calm. But the document does recognize some core priorities. The PRC represents America's most consequential geopolitical challenge. Competition with the PRC is most pronounced in the Indo-Pacific, but it is also increasingly global. From day one of the Biden administration, our approach has followed the same fundamentals that I've just described in the national security strategy writ large. Invest in the foundations of our strength at home, align our efforts with our network of allies and partners, and compete responsibly to defend and advance our interests and those of like-minded nations. Invest, align, compete. This is the framework that Secretary Blinken laid out in his speech on our China strategy a few months ago. We will engage constructively with the PRC wherever we can, not as a favor, not in exchange for our principles, but because working together to solve common problems is what the world expects from responsible powers, and because it is in our interest. In that spirit, the national security strategy also recognizes that the climate crisis is the greatest of all the shared threats that we face. Without immediate global action during this decisive decade, global temperatures will cross the critical warming threshold of 1.5 degrees Celsius, and after that, scientists have warned that some of the most catastrophic climate impacts will be irreversible. The United States will meet its global responsibility on climate thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act. And we will meet it on health and on food security and on arms control and on nonproliferation. Because we are steadfastly avoiding the temptation to see the world solely through the prism of strategic competition. We will continue to engage countries on their own terms. We will always seek to defend, not to dominate, to inspire, not to impose. And we will work with any nation that is willing to protect the rules-based order and uphold international law in every region of the world, no matter the country's size or so-called strategic importance. A more integrated Middle East that empowers our allies and partners will advance regional peace and prosperity while reducing the demands the region makes on the United States over the long term. In Africa, the dynamism and demographic growth of the region make it central to solving every single significant global challenge we face. And we will continue to revive and deepen our partnerships in the region that most directly impacts the United States more than any other region, our own region, the Western Hemisphere. This brings me to a thought that I suspect is on your minds just as it is on mine, and that is Ukraine. In many ways, the strength of the international response to Russia's brutal, unprovoked assault, its catastrophic shedding of the terms of the UN Charter, the way the world has come together to respond reveals President Biden's national security strategy in action. From the moment we received the first intelligence reports in the fall and stood up a planning cell out of the West Wing, we were disciplined and determined in our strategic objectives to help Ukraine succeed as a democratic, independent, sovereign, and prosperous state able to deter and defend itself against further aggression, to avoid a direct conflict between nuclear superpowers, and to ensure that the international system emerges from this conflict stronger rather than weaker. And 7 months later, we are still guided by these aims. We've woven together a coalition of nations to help Ukrainians defend their country with enormous military, economic, and humanitarian support. We've united the G7 to impose unprecedented economic costs that are squeezing Russia's key sources of critical goods and inputs for its economy. We've worked closely with our European friends to address the global ripple effects of the war, from striking an energy supply deal that helped cut dependence on Russian gas to driving new investments in food security globally. And we put months of quiet work to help shepherd Finland and Sweden into NATO, proving that Putin's actions have only infused the alliance with a sense of common purpose that has not been seen in decades. At extraordinary cost, with extraordinary bravery, the people of Ukraine can take enormous pride in knowing that Russia has gotten the exact opposite of what it expected. And it is the bravery and courage of the people of Ukraine, with the support of the international community, that has pushed Russia back from the aims it set out at the start of this conflict, which was, quite literally, as President Biden has said, to wipe Ukraine off of the map. At the same time, it's easy to remember how acute the risk of escalation has been throughout this conflict, how it was in those first few weeks, and how real it remains. And as National Security Advisor, that risk is never out of my mind. We take the threats that President Putin is making to the international community and to Ukraine itself seriously, as we have from the outset of the war. We will continue to be both resolute and responsible in our actions in support of Ukraine's freedom, its democracy, its sovereignty, its territorial integrity. We will not be intimidated. We will not be knocked off course. We will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. Standing here today, nearly 2 years into the Biden administration, it actually can be kind of hard to look all the way back to the first day on the job. A lot has happened since then. And it can be easy to look around and see the remarkable unity and resolve of the free world today, the way that it has stepped up on Ukraine and on so many other issues, and say, oh, that was just the natural order of things. But it's not necessarily the natural order of things. It takes work, it takes effort, it takes strategy. And against an array of steep, sharp, and dogged challenges, the United States, I believe, is today strategically well-positioned, and through the historic investments and the unrelenting work we're doing, is growing more so month by month. That doesn't just happen like a rubber band springing back into shape. It is the culmination of the work over 21 months to bend and build the architecture of this national security strategy under the leadership of our president, to replenish our reservoir of strength at home, to rebuild and create our strategic and economic partnerships around the world, and to try to meet every challenge we are facing, whether geopolitical or transnational, from a situation of strength. That is what we've set out to do. That's what we will try to do every day. We have the honor of holding these jobs, and I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to address you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. No one has made any O'Sullivan jokes yet, so I won't be the first. I want to thank you very much for coming here and for presenting this really very thoughtful and consequential strategy to all of us and to our nation. And I'd like to actually ask you some questions about it, starting where you left off. So 20 years ago, the Bush administration came out with its own national security strategy, and that strategy was really infused with the recognition that 9/11 had changed America and the world. But later, that administration got a lot of criticism for being overly focused on the global war on terror. Could you say to what extent has the Russian invasion of Ukraine shaped how the Biden administration sees the world and how it's reflected in this strategy? And have you done anything to hedge against a possible criticism that we were overly focused on this at a moment where other things were unfolding at breakneck speed as well?
Well, just to set some context, when we came into the administration in the early weeks, we did something that was quite unusual. We actually released something called Interim National Security Guidance, because we knew it would take some time to actually roll out with a full national security strategy. And we wanted both the public and, frankly, the whole government to understand what President Biden's guidance was across the kind of broad strategic sweep of our foreign policy. At that point, February of 2021, we expected to release the full national security strategy in February of 2022, which would be about on time by the scorekeepers. When December of 2021 rolled around, and we were pretty darn well convinced that Russia was going to invade Ukraine in February of 2022, we thought it probably made sense not to come out right in the midst of that unfolding invasion with our national security strategy, but rather to give some time for events to unfold and, frankly, for us working with the rest of the world, and in particular for the Ukrainians on the ground, to shape those events. So that is what has brought us here several months after the onset of the war to finally be rolling out our national security strategy. And we have been conscious of the fact that the underlying elements of that strategy, our sources of strength at home, our alliances, our ability to mobilize coalitions, the very themes that are at the heart of the strategy writ large, apply with great focus and consequence to the crisis in Ukraine. But we were equally mindful that both when you look at the immediate term of all the other challenges that are pressing upon the countries of the world, some of them exacerbated by the conflict in Ukraine. And then when you look out at the longer term over the nature of the challenge, for example, that the PRC faces to the rules-based international order, the national security strategy would have to incorporate the strategic fact of what is happening right now with Russia's assault on Ukraine, but it would also have to build that into a much larger vision. That's what we have tried to do. And what, I noted this in my speech, but frequently administrations have toggled back and forth between a kind of overemphasis on the geopolitics side and then an overemphasis on the kind of transnational order side, for lack of a better term. And what we're really trying to do is grapple headlong in the document with the fact that we've got to put each of these on a priority plane and then figure out both the tensions and the mutually reinforcing tendencies of those two. That's what we've tried to do in this document. I'll just close by saying, in respect to that, the geopolitical fact of the war in Ukraine has huge impacts on great powers, but it also has huge impacts on transnational challenges: food security, energy security, economic security, and over the midterm, the climate crisis because of the impacts on energy. So I don't know if that's a direct answer to your question, but that's how we've thought about building this in. And this war has loomed large in the formulation of this strategy, as it should, but we do not believe it has blotted out the sun because of all of the other consequential issues that need to be incorporated and integrated.
Sure, thank you. Another question about how this strategy has really evolved over the time that you've been in office. From the early days, the administration has talked about one of the organizing constructs of the world as being democracies versus autocracies. And as your comments and the strategy, as people will see, really, I think appears a lot more pragmatic to me, a lot more focused on we're willing to work with, build coalitions with anyone who's interested in working within a rules-based order. So if you could say a little bit about what that means practically for working with some of our NATO allies like Hungary or Turkey, or our partners like Singapore or Saudi Arabia. But I'm most interested, it's clear what the benefits of being more pragmatic are. What do you see as the costs of moving away from the starker depiction of democracy versus autocracy to a more embracing anyone who's happy to work in the international framework?
Well, for those of you who haven't had the chance to read or watch President Biden's speech at the UN General Assembly, I think it's worth doing so because he tackles this question head on in that speech. And he says, look, it's no secret that I, Joe Biden, believe profoundly in the fact that there is a contest between democracy and autocracy in the world, and that we believe that democracy is the best system to deliver for people, our people and people everywhere, and that autocracies believe that theirs is the best system, and they think democracies are weak and in decline. And the strategy reinforces that basic proposition, but President Biden also said that what the war in Ukraine has shown is that there is another dividing line, not just one between democracies and autocracies, but between those who want to tear down or alter fundamentally the terms of the international order as laid out in the UN Charter and those that don't. And many countries that do not have democratic institutions are on the side of defending and upholding the terms and principles of the UN Charter. We'll see that today with an overwhelming vote in favor of rejecting outright Russia's annexation, sham annexation of these territories in Ukraine. And there will be many non-democracies that cast their ballots yes for this resolution. So in a way, it is the Biden approach is one that makes a big principled bet. Democracy is a form of government worth defending. Democracies of the world are worth supporting. Democracies are our primary partners in our alliances in multiple geographies around the world. But it's also a bet on a system designed at the end of the Second World War that will need to be updated as we go forward, that says there are certain fundamental rules that countries of all stripes have signed up to and can support. This does leave us with a tension, but it's not a new one. It's one that's existed in American foreign policy through Democratic and Republican administrations alike. And the way that President Biden thinks about that tension is the most significant vehicles through which the United States is operating in the Biden administration are vehicles of like-minded democracies: NATO, the G7, the US-EU Trade and Technology Council, the Quad, AUKUS. But we can both build out that architecture and effectively infuse energy and support for the democratic and the free world, while at the same time working with a range of countries to help solve problems that matter to all of us, and for which cooperation requires us reaching beyond just countries that share our political system.
Great. Let's dig down a little bit more into this strategic competition versus cooperation, because I think the strategy does a great job of really grasping the essential conundrum, right? We're in an era of strategic competition, but increasingly our gravest problems are transnational in nature, and that means that ideally they would be addressed through global cooperation. So one way of dealing with this, as the strategy lays out and as you have discussed, is through different kinds of global cooperation. You've mentioned on several occasions these new institutions that have been created. But I'm wondering if we have thought enough, if the strategy addresses enough the idea of, well, should we think more about harnessing the dynamics of competition to solve global transnational issues? So, in other words, if we're going to live in a deeply competitive global environment, whether we like it or not, shouldn't we not be hoping for a global cooperation solution to some of these problems, but better looking for a way to harness competition to get solutions to transnational problems?
So in some cases, I think that makes absolute sense. The race for an edge in technology is a good example of that. Competition can produce technological breakthroughs that can help solve all of our problems, from food to energy to climate. And we should not be shy about that competition. And as I said in my remarks, the United States is not going to be shy about that competition. We are making greater, more fundamental, more far-reaching investments in the technology and innovation base of the United States through what has been passed in the Biden administration than we've seen in a generation or more. And we are going to run faster as a result of that, and we're going to help build up an allied ecosystem that collectively can run faster still. We also are not going to be shy, as I said in my remarks, about tailored, careful, targeted controls on the export of foundational technologies to our competitors. And we believe that through this, we can help spur the type of technological innovation over the years ahead that is going to work for rather than against human progress. There are other areas, though, arms control and nonproliferation, where almost inherently cooperation has to be more the order of the day than competition, because otherwise you can end up in arms races or races to the bottom. Similarly, the global minimum tax is an example of where fundamentally getting everyone aligned around a basic principle of fairness, that we're not going to let massive corporate evasion of taxes to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars happen because everyone will sign up to a minimum. You can't evade cooperation in that regard. So I think from our perspective, we don't want our strategy to just say, hey, look, there's cooperation, there's competition. Isn't that interesting? They're in tension with one another. It's rather to study the dynamics of the interplay between them and where actually competition can help induce advances on transnational challenges, seize that. And where greater cooperation actually can lift our geopolitical position because we're delivering for people and gaining goodwill and other soft power as a result of it, we'll do that too. But a sensible strategy in today's day and age has got to live in this space, has got to grapple with this fundamental question. How do you manage for the need for cooperation on global challenges at a time, as Meghan said, of intense competition? That is what we just spent, I think, like 42 pages answering. I just talked for a long time in trying to answer that. That's our best answer. It's an answer that we'll have to iterate over time in the precise applications and analyses. But for those of you who are going into national security and foreign policy, this, to me, is the strategic landscape into which you're about to enter. And it's way different from the Cold War. And it's way different from the post-9/11 era. It is a different kind of era that has massive consequences on both of these dimensions, on geopolitical competition and on the need to solve just eye-poppingly enormous transnational challenges. COVID-19 alone has taken the lives of millions around the world. You think about the climate crisis, what we're grappling with right now on food insecurity. So I just realized I've started laying myself out on the psychologist couch before you here today a little bit to let you inside our thinking. But that's really what we're trying to get at here. And there's not a perfect mathematical formula for it, but these are the considerations that lie at the heart of the strategy we're trying to pursue.
That's what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to get you to unfold and share some of it with you. And I would agree that I think the strategy is the best document I've seen thus far that really grapples with that dynamic, which is at the heart of today. Let's move to China. Obviously, China is infused throughout the document. So Russia's the acute threat, but China, as you said, is the big geopolitical, most consequential challenge to the United States. So this is something that maybe China's near neighbors see the world in the same way, maybe our NATO allies increasingly see the world this way, but much of the global South does not see the world this way. They've made very clear to all of us they don't want to be asked to choose. They don't share that perception at all. Could you say a bit about where we've been able to win over the global South on this framework, or what kind of tools we have to engage the global South in this conception of security?
So when President Biden talks about China, he frequently reinforces the point, and he did so recently at the UN by saying, we're looking for competition but not conflict, and we're not looking for a new Cold War. And when we say we're not looking for a new Cold War, that has a few different meanings to it. One is that we do not want to end up in kind of existential Manichaean, constant zero-sum competition at a moment when there are all these other larger challenges and equities afoot. But another way gets to the heart of Meghan's question, which is during the Cold War, we turned a lot of different regions in the world into proxy battlegrounds between the US and the Soviet Union. And we basically treated countries according to where they fit into that kind of larger proxy dynamic, rather than treating them on their own terms. And one of the points I made in the speech, one of the points the strategy really lays out, is that a successful approach to dealing with competition with the PRC means not making countries choose sides, not dividing the world into rigid blocks, and not making our relationship with countries kind of dependent on some kind of proxy fight between the US and the PRC, but rather having an affirmative agenda that is rooted in the best of what American foreign policy can be, a problem-solving mindset about the things that those countries are facing. And the more we can deliver on that, the more we can have confidence in ourselves that our offer that we can make to those countries of investment rather than extraction, of cooperation rather than coercion, is going to win out in the end without us having it to turn it into a proxy battleground. That is how we're going to be most successful. So just as one example, this G7 project on global infrastructure and investment, the basic notion behind it is that there is an enormous gaping need in physical, digital, and sustainable infrastructure around the world. And in too many places, too frequently, the financing options available to countries end up saddling them with debt or end up creating large gaps where they can't do what they want to do. So we're trying to mobilize an enormous amount of money to do projects like a $2 billion solar deal in Angola that the president announced, or small modular reactors in emerging nations. And in doing that, it's not designed to be against anything or anyone. It is designed to be for a vision of a high standard, sustainable model of economic growth for countries. That's one of many examples of how we're trying to pursue this. And I think countries react so much better when you're going to them with this affirmative offering than going to them and saying, hey, X country's bad, don't look at them, which is not a successful way, we believe, to work with countries who really want to just be treated on their own terms.
So the strategy tackles a lot of thorny issues, a lot of complex problems, but there's one area where maybe some readers will want more, and that's in the area of international economic issues. So in talking about the administration's economic agenda, the IPEF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, gets a lot of attention. Could you say a little bit more about that economic and trade agenda? What are other components of it? And the strategy says quite baldly, the day of traditional trade agreements is in the past, and market access is no longer on the table. Is it going to be sufficient in a world where economic problems are really looming? We're sitting in Washington during the IMF World Bank meetings and hearing every day, repeated warnings about the economic situation in the world and what can be anticipated for countries in the coming months. Does there need to be a more meaty economic international agenda?
So first, I just want to clarify, we're not saying market access is off the table. In fact, we're looking at a new model, kind of FTA, that could be applied in certain contexts where market access could conceivably be a piece of it. But the critical point is that market access cannot be the only measure by which you have a good trade strategy or don't have a good trade strategy, which is basically how the orthodoxy has looked at it for 30 years. If you sit and talk to countries around the world and what they are seeking from the point of view of protecting their economic stability and generating economic growth, it's a few things. First, they want to make sure they have secure, resilient, effective supply chains. That's at the heart of IPEF. That is not something that the world or the United States focused on as much as we should have before COVID-19 laid so much bare. They're looking to have international financial institutions and the multilateral development banks like the World Bank, which it's having its annual meetings now, actually shift to a model of being a provider of global public goods with much greater ambition than in the past. And Secretary Yellen just gave a speech about the Biden administration's vision for MDB reform. They're looking for investment in their countries along the lines of the PGII model that I just described. And they are looking for technology, technological know-how, the capacity to take that technology and help create productivity in their own societies. And then they're looking for an effective way through the energy transition to a climate sustainable future. You take those things, most of them are not really present in the current offering of the traditional FTA. But in all 5 of those areas, there are massive incentives that are not just lowering tariffs. And by the way, most tariffs under the WTO are pretty damn low anyway. So from our perspective, focusing on that holistic package of economic incentives through partnerships like IPEF and other vehicles. And then I mentioned the global minimum tax, ensuring that we built fairness into this system as well in the area of international taxation, which again, the traditional FTA doesn't touch upon. That's what the Biden administration means. It's not just about being against something from the past, it's being for a set of economic initiatives and instruments that look different from the past, and I understand are met with skepticism by those who want to stick by what we have historically or traditionally done. But we believe we have something to offer that's good for workers in the United States and in the rest of the world, good for economic growth, good for the climate, and good for a basic concept of fairness and growth in the world.
So Jake, I'm going to ask you one more question and then turn to the students in this room. So I believe people will line up to ask a question. I invite you to start to do that as I pose this last question. So one of the real themes of this strategy is breaking down, and there's a rush for the microphone, breaking down the barrier between domestic policy and foreign policy. And the strategy is very strong on investing in America and how that will be good for America's role in the world. But I wanted to ask about what is the message to the average American in this national security strategy? Is there a message that ties the average American closer to America's role in the world, that gives the average American a better understanding of why America needs to be engaged in the world as the Biden administration has demonstrated the aptitude and the desire to be?
So look, I think the events of the past 3 or 4 years have made such a powerful and profound case to the American people on both self-interest and on values for why our engagement in the world really matters to them. And this strategy reflects all of that. And what do I mean when I say self-interest and values? On self-interest, the American people recognize through COVID-19 and through the climate crisis that events and decisions happening elsewhere have a profound effect on their lives and livelihoods, where they sit, where they live, on their families. And figuring out how we work with the rest of the world to make their lives better, safer, and easier on issues like that, that's core to this national security strategy. But it's not just about self-interest. Why are there Ukrainian flags hanging in small towns and cities across this country? Yes, it's in part because we recognize that aggression unchecked is aggression unleashed and could come to our shores or affect our security. But a lot of it is about the idea of being inspired by people fighting for their freedom, for their democracy, for their liberty. It's about believing in something, a better world, and the American people do believe in that, and they believe we have a responsibility to help people in achieving that. And in many ways, that galvanizing fact of the war in Ukraine has reminded people of something larger than just technocratic arguments about how, bad things happening elsewhere can affect bad things here. It's infused a sense of purpose, I think, in a much broader segment of the American public than any argument I could make or any strategy we could write. And so now the question is, how do we harness that in a way that gives people confidence that we are actually going to vindicate both their self-interest, the things that they need for them and their families and their communities, and their sense of commitment to a higher ideal. And the question you asked earlier about this kind of balance between principle and pragmatism kind of gets at that. But that's how I think we're thinking about the American people at this point. If you ask a straight poll, foreign policy doesn't necessarily poll as high as a lot of other issues do. But we all saw with our own eyes the way that people have responded and continue to respond on issues like Ukraine. And so I believe that there is a deep belief in this country about a role for America in the world that is rooted in something larger than ourselves. And that this is not something just for Georgetown University or for Washington, D.C. It's about an idea of America and its role in the world that is real and is profound, and it's something that got me into foreign policy in the first place, that I believe in and care about, and it's our job to be good stewards of that as we go forward.
Great, thank you. Let's turn and get some questions from the students. Please, If you could introduce yourself.
Hi there. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan, for coming to Georgetown today and taking time out of your busy schedule to present here. My name is Andrew Wong. I'm a first year in the School of Foreign Service from Long Hill, New Jersey. And my question today pertains to the PRC and America's role in promoting human rights around the world. I'm an American Hong Konger. In 2019, I was in Hong Kong, and I watched as Hong Kong's democracy and our human rights were crushed by the PRC, and I watched as my family and many of my friends suffered because of those events. In our new national security strategy, the PRC is named as our greatest geopolitical challenge. My question is, what does this national security strategy do to stop the PRC's assault on human rights and democracy, not only in Hong Kong, Xinjiang, Tibet, but across the world? And how do we ensure that democracy and human rights can prevail in these uncertain times?
So, first, the national security strategy talks at some length about both the principled steps we can take to stand up and speak out on issues of human rights, and the Biden administration has been doing that most immediately in standing up in defense of the brave citizens, especially the brave women of Iran. And equally with respect to the PRC, we have spoken out when it comes to the horrors unfolding in Xinjiang, the abuse that has been wrought that you saw with your own eyes in Hong Kong, and the ways in which human rights are repressed across the PRC, even outside of those areas. But there's also practical steps that we can take as well. How do we make sure that certain technologies that are enabling censorship, repression, and mass surveillance are not being powered by American technology? How do we make sure that our supply chains are not being infected by the fruit of forced labor in places like Xinjiang? And we've worked with the Congress on that. How do we make sure that we're working with like-minded countries through every vehicle that we can to shine a spotlight on what is happening? And we've just seen the UN report on the horrors of Xinjiang put forward by the special rapporteur. So for us, it's a matter of speaking with clarity on these issues, rallying other countries as well, and then trying to take a set of practical steps to ensure that we are touching upon or trying to restrict or constrain the tools and technologies that exacerbate or make this possible. That's not a panacea. This is an ongoing work that has to continue for as long as we've got good-hearted people stepping up to try to push back on these kinds of things in partnership with allies both inside and outside government. But those are the steps that we are trying to take in this administration.
Thank you. Could I have the next question, please?
Hello, Mr. Sullivan. Thank you for being here. My name is Feryal Faramarzi. I was born and raised in Iran, and now I'm a U.S. citizen. Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for amplifying the voice of Iranian women and Iranian protesters in the street. I know it means a lot to them, people who are fighting with bare hands and with nothing to fight for their freedom. You mentioned in your comments on Twitter that you will hold responsible people of government of Iran for their actions against the protest. Could you clarify what does holding responsible mean? Because in your opening remarks, you also mentioned Iranian government continues on their nuclear power plans. Obviously, sanctions hasn't worked so far. And sanctions won't stop them from killing innocent people. So what does it mean to hold them responsible for this?
So first, accountability is partly about, again, shining a spotlight on this behavior. It is about calling it out in plain and stark terms, which President Biden and those of us in the administration have done. Second, it is about imposing costs, not just sanctioning Iran as a country, but sanctioning the individuals and the entities that are responsible for the crackdown and the repression. And the Biden administration has imposed a round of sanctions on the morality police and on other officials of the Iranian government who are participating in these crackdowns. And then, of course, there is the part of this where the United States needs to take affirmative steps as well. And what we have done is issued from the Treasury Department a new set of guidance that facilitates and removes obstacles to the provision of communication technologies, apps and the like, so that the Iranian people can communicate with one another and communicate with the world. So that is what the United States has done thus far. That doesn't mean that we can stop every bullet or hold back every baton, but we are going to show where we stand on this issue and take the practical steps available to us. That has been the resolute determination of the president and our administration from the moment these protests broke out, and it will continue.
Thank you. Next question, please.
First of all, thank you for being here, Mr. Sullivan. My name is Asher. I'm a freshman studying government. And I noticed that in the new National Security Strategy document, China is referred to as the PRC, whereas in past national security strategies, mainland China has just been referred to as China. So I was wondering what the significance or purpose of this name change is.
I think if you ask like 10 people in our government, they give you slightly different answers probably to that question, but I will give you mine, which is we're intent, to the extent that we are in a competition with the People's Republic of China, to not make this about the Chinese people, to make this about the government and the policies and strategies that the government of the PRC is pursuing. And so we want to, in our nomenclature, be careful about that point, because it is very important to us that this not become Americans versus Chinese, but rather a question of the United States' national security strategy as it relates to the government of the People's Republic of China.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Deepa Fuyal. I'm a freshman in the School of Foreign Service, majoring in international politics, so I greatly appreciate you coming out here today. My question is in relation to the international economy. With increasing inflation in America, obviously the default response would be to increase interest rates. However, as the responsible world power that you've said that we are, should the Federal Reserve approach to resolve inflation by increasing interest rates be reconsidered, in your opinion, to account for the potential damage to the economy of developing countries that have a large amount of their debt denominated in US dollars?
So I will not speak to the Federal Reserve. They'll make their independent decisions on how to proceed. And from the National Security Council, we don't weigh in on those matters. What I will say is, as we see what the Federal Reserve does, as we see what the totality of economic circumstances are, it's my job, the job in coordinating international economic policy alongside my colleagues at the White House for the U.S. government, to think about what steps we can take to improve the position of emerging economies and less developed economies around the world on debt relief, which will be a major topic at the G20 coming up in a few weeks. On, as I said before, multilateral development bank reform, which is a topic unfolding as we speak here in Washington, and on the necessary humanitarian assistance on everything from food security to health. So I will focus on those things, and I will leave to the Federal Reserve the decisions it makes, which just fall outside my purview, and I'm sorry I can't give you a more direct answer to your question.
I'm afraid we have time for one more question. If I could turn the floor over.
Hello. Okay, so my name is Edward Sun, and I'm a first year in SFS from Beltsville, Maryland. As we all know, autonomy is the future, and you yourself, in your speech, has talked about how we need to modernize our military and intelligence enterprise, the importance of cybersecurity, and new technologies such as autonomous systems, which you also listed. As countries like the PRC invest $2.3 trillion just this year, compared to the United States, plan to invest $1.1 trillion over a course of 5 years. My question for you is regarding AWS, so autonomous weapon systems, and maritime autonomous surface ships, and who you think should be held liable based on U.S. policy and maybe even your own legal opinion. I know you have a very long legal career of advisement. Do you think it should be like the AI, the flag state, officer in command, or even the engineers that are held responsible? I don't know if you're able. That's a very long question. I'm sorry, but
no, that is a question that I'm going to file away, and when I'm back teaching in the classroom, when I'm out of this job, I'm going to teach a class specifically on the question of legal liability for autonomous systems and how you could trace it back. I mean, the only answer I can give sitting here now is going to be highly unsatisfying, and it depends on the particular circumstances and situations. But we should not operate in a world in which autonomous systems, AI-enabled autonomous systems, unleashed by a country, absolve that country of any responsibility for them. Like somehow they can say, no, that's something else out there entirely. And what we need, as we think about setting these rules of the road around emerging technologies, we need those rules of the road not just to be decided among like-mindeds, but there need to be strategic stability style discussions among major competitors with significant technologically advanced militaries, much as we had throughout the Cold War with the Soviet Union, except for now it applies to a far broader range of technologies than nuclear. And it applies in circumstances like the question of taking the human out of the loop in AI-enabled weaponry. And that's something that I have taught in previous courses, think a lot about. Our military planners and our lawyers think a lot about these issues as well. And I'll leave it at that for today, but you've now inspired me for, a couple years down the line here. Thank you.
I think there are probably going to be a lot of students signing up for your class, whenever that is, wherever that is. Before we thank you, I want to turn to Dr. Paul Shari of the Center for New American Security. He's the vice president and the director of studies there. It's been fantastic to have the opportunity to speak with you about this. You've given us a lot of food for thought. The document is really fabulous and grapples with some of our most pressing challenges, and I can tell that some have already read it, and I hope that many more will. So thank you. I'll let Paul give you the final thanks.
Thank you, Meghan. Please join me in offering a round of applause for Jake Sullivan and Meghan Sullivan. One of the key themes that we heard in this discussion today was the truly global challenge that the United States faces in maintaining a free, open, and prosperous international order, and the importance of working with partners and allies to build a coalition against revisionist authoritarian states. At the same time, we heard about the shared global challenges that all nations face on issues like climate change and pandemics, and they need to work with competitor nations to address those. And lastly, one of the key themes that we heard in this discussion was the really importance of doubling down on core U.S. strengths of a free and open society and a culture of innovation and rising to meet these challenges in the future. I'd like to thank Dean Joel Hellman and the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service for co-hosting today's discussion. I'd like to thank Jasmine Butler and Anna Peterson at the Center for New American Security. Thanks to all of you for coming in person and joining us in the live stream, and thank you especially to the students who added questions for today's discussion. Please stay tuned for more on these issues. Thank you.